Доброго дня, шановні учасники. Ми починаємо наступну дискусію протягом
Dear participants, we are starting next discussion, and we're going to discuss the topic of implementation of European standards and new media legislation of Ukraine. Among speakers, we have Olga Gerasimyuk, Chair of the National Television and Radio Broadcasting Council of Ukraine, and there Halina Smirnova, Project Manager for EU and Council of Europe, working together to support media freedom in Ukraine. Christina Rozgoni, International Consultant of the Council of Europe, and Oleksandr Burmahin, Executive Director of NGO Human Rights Platform, member of the Working Group on the Development of the Draft Law on Media, and perhaps Mikita Portoraev will also manage to join us, who is the Chair of the Verkhovna Rada Committee on Information and Humanitarian Policy. I shall be I'll be at the moderator. I'm the media lawyer and Digital Security Laboratory, and you can also join our discussion. Please leave your questions under the stream of this discussion, and we will speak about them. This discussion happens on the support of the project of the European Union to support media freedom in Ukraine, one of the priorities of which is the adoption of a new audiovisual legislation and enhancing media regulator capacity according to the standards of the Council of Europe. So I guess we'll start with the standards and harmonization. The Ukrainian legislation with the European one in the sphere of media. In 1995, when Ukraine joined the Council of Europe, we took the liabilities to bring our legislation in compliance with the European legislation on the freedom of expressions and media regulation part. During this step, Council of Europe for many times reminded Ukraine about its liabilities, but only recently Ukraine has managed to launch very important media reforms, to launch the public broadcaster and delineation of the printed press. TV and radio, they didn't have many changes though, but altogether when signing the agreement on the association with the EU, another important point was mentioned, the implementation of the European Director of Audiovisual Media in Ukraine and enhance the powers of the National Council as the main regulator. To fulfill these liabilities, in September last year, the Profile Committee of Verkhovna Rada on Information and Humanitarian Policy, they voted for the complex law to be adopted that was not only supposed to bring to do the harmonization in the area of audiovisual media, but also for the very first time in Ukraine to implement certain requirements on the status and activity of online media. This draft law caused lots of discussions in media and many provisions were both criticized and well accepted from the side of the journalist community. And one of the critical remarks were the special powers that the national regulator can obtain, abuse of which can take place afterwards. So now I would like to give floor to Olga Gerasimyuk, Chair of the National Television and Radio Broadcasting Council of Ukraine. I would like to ask her, Olga, do you think that the new draft law presupposes such a enhancement of powers of the national regulator, and are there any, any ways of controlling it, and what actually is missing in the current legislation on media, and what precludes the national regulator to fulfill its functions well enough right now and to protect the Ukrainian space? So, Olga, do you hear me? Yes, I hope that you can hear me as well. Thank you for your question, and thank you for the possibility to participate in this important forum. I would like to say that within the context of the topic of the forum, it's a question of implementation of European standards and new legislation. It has a very it has a double important role. We are still in the epoch that was fixed before Zuckerberg, the law according to which we live in the information space, and the National Council as a regulator, the European regulator, works according to. This law appeared ever since then, and it hasn't changed. And then some of this discussion can perhaps were even in the kindergarten back then, or maybe weren't even born. I think in Ukraine it's a very difficult situation to live in this because we are paying, in blood for setting the European values. As for this reform, it only fixes the convictions how necessary this report is, since information war we all live in, and information wars, of course, they are going on all over the world, but we have a special situation because we also have the actual war. Today in this space, it's vitally important to save the society, to counteract this war. We need this reform. And of course, what we are trying to overcome, I hope that we will not give up. And it only shows, how important it is. But overcoming information chaos and adopting standards in the profession, it's something you should start with to integrate Donbass, for media to understand their mission on this vitally important matter. To do that, we have to start with, to move from feudalism to regulation of information space. This project that was processed by a wonderful professional team of good experts, this draft law levels Ukraine, no, not levels, but puts on the same level Ukraine with, on the same level of European society. And it's not only radio and television which take a big segment these days in the information sphere. It's the law. This law gives possibility for us to only start what is out even of discussion in the world. It's no secret for all of us that in media sphere today there's a certain revelry of manipulation, of fake news, of propaganda. So, of course, the national so then the National Council is to be, like the scarecrow that is going to punish, to sanction, and it's a stereotype. Nobody is trying to debunk, but because we have to understand what is offered. You have to carefully study the material. The National Council today, I shall start with, by answering to your second question. So it has the law that was created back in the first years of independence, when it didn't give the possibility to face the challenges of today. It's very nice to have the National Council in the state that it is now, because politicians have chosen it as a lightning rod where you can address all of the problems. But if you ask in each separate case where in the law on the National Council there's a single power to overcome the challenges, then the answer, nobody wants to know this answer, because today we are only dealing with the political engaged company on the National Council. So today we have elections. The political campaign has been ongoing for 1 week now. I work in the National Council for the 6th year, and every year our working groups submitted to the parliament, to the international organizations, the conclusions which say that the National Council has no possibility to influence what is happening on air during the political campaigns. No possibility. But according to the law, we are the only responsible body for control what's happening on air. And this will keep on happening. So in order to change at least something today, we are trying to, I don't know if all colleagues were making administrative protocols, but we were fighting for this during the previous elections. And this story is not legally regulated. Today, in order to test this, we are just experimenting. We are going to try to make it, but I don't know if it will have any effect. So the word to try to do is all we have in our practice today, because, trying to warn the broadcaster that it is violating the law, we can only announce the audit or the inspection. I would like to emphasize only to announce the inspection. And the politicians are making shows about it, and they do not only, and they send messages about this horrible monster who is an obstacle to freedom of expression, or freedom of speech. And I think that right now a lot of people in the conditions of lockdown are now learning to start their own business, do something for the cinema. But this coronavirus pandemic, it stopped it is an obstacle for the National Council to fulfill its functions. Today, even if when we make agenda that some of the broadcasters are informing us, then we know that you can consider it only when we are present there, because it's according to the law. But we are depriving you of this wonderful possibility, and we shall not attend. So, dear colleagues, I can give you many details on its account why we do not have a possibility to work these days. How could we change if the law was adopted? I don't know how much time I have. I just wanted to emphasize that for the very first time, a perfect document was created, and the representatives of the industry, of the NGOs, participated in its development in cooperation with European experts. We all worked on it. It's the balanced, compromised document, and what we have today is objective reality, because to bring order in the information space, it's like to win the war. If mention the powers of the National Council, then of course those who want to get the answer to these questions, he's going to read this in the law. And today there will be representatives of the working groups, like the executive director Oleksandr Burmahin, the member and of Geo platform. He will give you more information, but I would like to say that the fact of regulating the media sphere cannot be interpreted as limitation to freedom of speech. Regulating freedom of speech only starts when the other rights are violated. The European Convention says that the right to freedom of speech is not absolute. The list of limits are mentioned in that article. It's all envisaged in the law. And exercising of these freedoms, since are connected with the responsibilities, can lead to sanctions or conditions which are set by the law, which are important and necessary in the democratic society, especially in the interest of the national security and territorial integrity. To all of it is described in this law. When somebody says that they have some dragon sanctions, so dear colleagues, let's discuss what is mentioned. They sound in the way that the media representatives have more possibility to discuss their positions in the discussion about the violation of the law. The draft law clearly foresees the responsibility only for the subjects in the sphere of media and does not touch bloggers that we hear, and we hear the opposite right now. We are not to regulate the internet. We can only regulate the spread of content that violates the limitations. No blocking, because I hear that the National Council say that we have the possibility just to push the button, but it's not. The court can only make that decision, but because it's not that we can turn somebody off because he said something wrong. Only after you read the draft law you can study the information. And I would like to say that most of the countries of EU, they do regulate the online media. Out of 11 countries do that.
And when people say that online media shall be completely let free, they would like to make unequal conditions for media professionals. For example, there are regulations for radio and TV, but no regulation for online, for internet media, though they are probably the most powerful type of media right now. I would like to highlight that efficient self-regulation is not working in Ukraine yet. And when this draft law proposes self-regulation, this co-regulation is an additional way to protect from the actions of the regulator. The regulator should represent interests of the media market, of all the actors of the media market. This is a great innovation which we need to improve. In the opinion of our international partners, it is a limitation to the National Council, but we consider it is a necessary part of the regulatory activity in Ukraine. I know that I don't have enough time. I just would like to say that this draft law, dear journalists, please pay your attention that this draft law doesn't regulate the actions of the journalist. It decreases the violations of the state to use media in its own interest. Well, that's it from me for now. If you have any questions, I will be happy to take them. Thank you. Thanks, Olga. Please stay with us. If we have questions, we will ask you to answer them. And now I would like to give a word to our expert from the Council of Europe, Christina Rozgoni. Christina knows well. She's an expert in the media legislation of Europe, and she knows a lot about European standards. Her presentation, which will be in English, is related to those standards and those commitments that Ukraine shall aim to in creating its own legislation. Christina, can you hear us? The floor is yours.
So thank you so much and a warm welcome to everybody. I'm Christina Rozgoni, Council of Europe expert from Vienna, University of Vienna. And it's my honor to be with you today and as a long-standing colleague and, let's put it this way, friend of the Ukrainian media development process. I am really pleased to discuss with you today the most pressing issues on European standards and new media legislation in Ukraine and how to implement new media standards to the legislation. I am going to highlight briefly the most relevant and current issues and debates on the implementation of the European and especially the European Union standards, international law in Ukraine, and I will briefly talk about the principles and the rationales of audiovisual media regulation from the European perspective, and also I will then highlight the most pressing issues and debates right now also going on and debated within the European Union on two major aspects. One is the independence of the regulator and how to ensure the independence of the national regulators, which is, let's put it this way, a hot topic right now in Europe with regards to the new European Union rules. And the other question is about how to regulate online platforms, online digital intermediaries, so-called video sharing platforms, and what are the pros and what are the cons of implementing these laws. Thank you. Can you switch to the next slide, please? Okay, thank you so much. So first, just a quick reminder about why Ukraine has to attend to these questions and why Ukraine has to needs to attend to the European standards and the European Union's new rules. First, there is the agreement, the association agreement between Ukraine and the European Union, which is about transposing the European Union's regulations and into Ukrainian national law, and especially special regards to the European Union's directives. Here we need to highlight the directive on audiovisual media services that was amended in 2018. Excuse me, just still back to the second slide. So the Audiovisual Media Services Directive that was amended in 2018, and the new rules are being implemented right now also within the European Union, and these are the rules that Ukraine also has to take into consideration. The other legal requirement was with regards to the alignment with the Council of Europe standards regarding media freedom and pluralism, and here the resolution of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe was to be taken into consideration. Okay, so these are basically the fundaments, the drives about why Ukraine needs to attend to European Council of Europe and European Union rules and regulations and norms and also standards. But before we go into the very details, let us consider for a minute the rationales and the principles of regulating audiovisual media in Council of Europe member states and according to the European Convention on Human Rights. So first, there are so-called democratic purposes of regulation. Among these, we can very much be aware and familiar already with the issues with regards to hate speech and how to protect users, how to protect citizens from hatred and from exposure to hatred and from exposure to hate speech. Also here, we have to consider the principles of dignity and of media plurality and about the democratic role of the media to inform citizens and to allow citizens for informed decisions. So these are the so-called democratic purposes of media regulation and of audiovisual media content regulation. Another very important strand is about cultural policy considerations. Here we need to highlight diversity and diversity of the media. And here comes the question about language, minorities in the country and how to protect minorities within the country. And there are several standards of Council of Europe in this regard that are also applicable to media regulation and towards media regulation. A third pillar is about consumer protection. Here we need to be reminded about standards with regards to advertising and advertisements and about misleading advertisements, harmful advertisements, or unconscious advertisement types, and how to protect viewers, how to protect citizens, how to protect users from those harms. So these are also principles and policy considerations of regulation. And the fourth pillar is about economic purposes. Here what we need to be reminded are the questions how to regulate for transparency of ownership, a huge topic and a very, very important topic in Ukraine. And with regards to media in Ukraine and the standards about who can own and who can control and who should not control media and how to regulate for that. And another very important strand here is about fair competition and how to ensure fair competition on the media market. So basically, these are the four main tenets why and how to regulate audiovisual media and on what purposes and in which manner. Can you please switch to the next slide? Meanwhile, I just start to talk about a little bit another area of European standards and norms that Ukraine and Ukrainian. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. That's it. Wonderful. So the principles of good regulation, because this is the area that is less clear, let's put it this way, from the laws, but it is very much about the practice of regulation, and this is very much about how to align with the standards of good regulation. And here I need to highlight 5 different aspects. One is proportionality, which is a very important part of good regulation, and that needs to be reflected in laws and legislation. Proportionality is about that regulatory intervention should focus on harm, it should focus on really pressing needs for intervention, and also that remedies should be appropriate to the risk posed and the cost identified, and these remedies should be also, and the risk should be also minimized. Another perspective here is of accountability and how to make regulation accountable, especially towards the citizens and towards other stakeholders. And here are very important rules on iteration, for example, between the regulator and between the public. And these are also very important rules we need to take into consideration. The third area is about consistency of regulation, and that rules should be fair and they should be foreseeable, and their enforcement should be foreseeable for citizens and for all stakeholders. The fourth area is about transparency. That is extremely important with regards to public trust in media regulation. So regulation should attend to the principles of transparency in order to enable the public, the media itself, to oversee how regulation works. And the fifth area is about targeted regulation, which means that regulation should be focused on the problems and minimize side effects thereof. So it means, in other words, that regulation should be minimized and kept to the minimum if possible, and really focus on the problems that it needs to tackle. So these are basically the most important principles of regulation from a European perspective, and according to the norms of Council of Europe, and also attended by the European Union. And now let us look at the European Union's. Please, next slide, slide 5. So let us take a closer look at the hot topics of today, and how these hot topics are debated in Europe, and how do they affect, thank you, the new media legislation in Ukraine. So, as I've said before, Ukraine agreed with the European Union to transpose European Union's legislation into Ukraine's national law, and here the directive of the Audiovisual Media Services Directive of the European Union is the most important legal instrument that we need to take into consideration. This directive is the centerpiece of audiovisual regulation within the European Union. The fundamental regulatory principles of the directive are technological neutrality. Basically, it means that rules should cover all services with audiovisual content, irrespective of technology used to deliver that content, no matter whether it's broadcast media, it's radio, it's television, or it's streamed via the internet. If it's audiovisual content, and if it's there is editorial responsibility over this content, which should constitute also an audiovisual program, then the regulation should apply. However, this directive introduced a so-called graduated approach to regulation. There is a clear difference between linear and non-linear so-called on-demand services, which is the basis for a graduated regulatory approach. In other words, there are different rules, and the rules are different, and their application is different if it's about linear media, which is television or radio, the classic forms of audiovisual media and broadcast media, or if it's distributed and disseminated via the internet, because less regulation and different type of regulation is necessary for these type of so-called non-linear on-demand services. And a very important point here, which is also important for us, is about the country of origin principle of the AVMSD, which is about that legislators and regulators should have competence
And the question, in fact, is very general, but I would like to address it to Oleksandr Burmahin and to add also my question. So the viewer asked why the new legislation, the new media legislation brought so many discussions and how can it influence the audience, not only media. And my question to you, Alexander, as the member of the working group on development of the draft law. So the standards that we were just told about by Christina, how much were they put into the draft law on media, and does this draft law really helps to protect the freedom of expression? Thank you for your question. Greetings to all participants of the Donbas Media Forum. So as for the question from the audience, the answer consists of two aspects. So the answer consists of two aspects. One of the main reasons of these discussions is that for the very first time, the regulation has appeared. For example, the Hromadas broadcasting, and this is something new, and it's the implementation of certain standards and international approaches. So the broadcasting of communities, and that's the possibility for small communities to create the audiovisual material that they think is necessary for this local community. The new regulation that covers different aspects of the activity on the internet. It's the possibility of communication of the National Council as a regulator on the internet, the online media, non-linear audiovisual media, so all called the online cinemas. So it's like the specter of new regulation connected with the internet, and this regulation was never in place. And to many stakeholders, it seems, and it seemed, that it's a very convenient situation when you make money and the influence of the audience on the internet is growing every year, and they already also taking part of the audience from the television and, of course, press. And of course, they're okay with it. There's no control, no supervision, no regulation. They are making money and not responsible for anything. But when some certain norms appeared somewhere, which would start regulating certain aspects and create more or less equal conditions for work, because television, printed press, or internet, these are the media that have to be maximum. They are to have the equal conditions from the point of view of the responsibility for certain content. And this is one of the reasons why so many discussions appeared. Of course, a big part of the stakeholders or of interested people paid attention that the regulator can become the regulator but not the observer. Olga Volodymyrovna already mentioned the electoral process, and she mentioned the systemic irresponsibility of media during these important events in the country, which regularly take place in our country. And unfortunately, our organization, together with other organizations, have been conducting monitoring in 2019, and now we are highlighting the electoral process in media now, and there are many systemic violations. So you can say the media, they're ignoring the demands of the electoral legislation on the way the electoral process is to be highlighted, which has a negative effect on the voter. So one part of these discussions are connected with the fact that this project about media offers to introduce or to implement the civilized rules of the game, but not the rules themselves, but also the responsibility for its violation. And too many, this way of things is not, many are not okay with that way of things, and others' opinions is connected with the influence of the the direct agents of Russian Federation are in Ukraine, and they have their own media outlets, including television. They're using them not as media, but they are disseminating manipulative theses or narratives of Russian Federation via them. And these subjects do not need this project they radically do not need it, because we we are in war for 6 years, but we do not have in the information legislation any norms connected with the armed aggression in the information field, which is very weird, actually, in my opinion. Another third component of these discussions is actually experts, and including international experts, our colleagues from public organizations or NGOs, employees of the industry who paid attention at the flaws or some technical errors in the first draft law, because it has been actually it's now the it has been revised, and because really to develop a new big project about media, which would include so many novelties, and to make it perfect from the first on the first try is difficult. So I think that these three components led to this discussion emerge, and it is ongoing. Thank you, Oleksandr. And I would like to give floor right now to Halina Smirnova. The European Union and Council of Europe, as we understood, they support the media reforms in Ukraine. So, and at the same time, there are certain remarks. So, Halina Smirnova, project manager for EU and Council of Europe, working together to support media freedom in Ukraine. So, what are the expectations, and what gives Ukraine this harmonization of Ukrainian legislation with the EU? So, are there some benefits for the Ukrainian media and for Ukrainian viewers? Good day, dear good day, dear participants. I'm really happy that we have this discussion today, and I would like to say that Ukraine is to harmonize its legislation in accordance with the standards of EU as a member state of EU, and it's according to the agreement on association. And I would like to remind you that in the beginning of July, the Office of the Council of Europe has published the announcement on the support of the draft law, and mentioned that the draft law is an important step to fulfilling by Ukraine its international liabilities, and this message was supported by a number of embassies, and the experts of the Council of Europe provided their recommendations on this draft law. Part of them were already taken into consideration, and now we have received another demand for the expertise of the updated draft law. We shall prepare it. And the draft law that I introduced is called EU and Council of Europe are working together to support media freedom in Ukraine. So we did a lot of work to enable more transparency and openness while this draft law is developed. We had 6 expert discussions of different chapters of the draft law, and we also involved Ukrainian and international experts to this work, and held a number of educational tutorials, and lots of experts, and aware with this with the provisions of the directive and the standards of EU.
The role of a regulator is very important. We highlighted the importance of an independent regulator for many years. In 2017, we carried out a survey on the responsibilities of the regulator, and one of the key recommendations by experts was to adopt a draft law on media, which explains how to make a national council an independent body. In 2016, our international experts were concerned on how bureaucratic is the process of the regulator's work. They were surprised that the regulator has to approve its regulatory acts with the Ministry of Justice. Back then, the experts wrote that these normatives have to be rewritten to improve the work of the regulator. Another important issue is activities of the regulator and monitoring during the elections. Last year, at the presidential and parliamentary elections, we supported monitoring and covering of the campaign in the media. This monitoring saw systemic problems. One of these problems were deficiencies at the legislative level, which prevent Verkhovna Rada from promptly reacting to violations. The Verkhovna Rada was an observer. We hope that the draft law on media will solve those issues, will bridge those gaps, and that a new transparent mechanism will be developed, a mechanism of what the National Council will do when there are violations in the election campaign. So that is it from me for now. I wish you a productive discussion today. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Halina. We have new questions to our experts. Within the context of the strong national council, a question to Oleksandr. We want to reform internet, we want to regulate online media, but doesn't this regulation but isn't this regulation transformed, as we see in Russia, to block opposition media, to block and to limit the expression of opinions? Is it true? In order to answer this question, we need to read the text. So I suggest that all those interested in this draft law number 2693D, it is published on the website of the Verkhovna Rada, so you can read it and see how some issues are offered to be tackled. As for the comparison with the Russian monitoring regulator, this is what Olga Gerasimyuk said. Olga Gerasimyuk said, all the countries are moving toward monitoring and regulating the internet. There are more than 4 billion users of internet and of other services, of social networks. Internet covers more and more, and it even impacts election process. And we cannot but regulate these, because this development has a lot of pros, but also it increases threats and risks. I mean, cyber crimes and other negative dimensions of the internet. We need to regulate that, of course. As Olga Gerasimyuk has already said, the majority of European countries has already implemented relevant legislation. There is a list of challenges related to this regulation. Ukraine and members of the working group on this draft law has worked a lot with this topic. How do we define what is an online media and what is not? For example, messengers such as Telegram that have about 200,000 followers, are they a media or not? Shall they be regulated or not? The same goes with social networks, with social media. Most of the countries have to tackle these issues, and the question is, how do they do that? What mechanism, what tools they use, what procedures they use, which resources they block? For example, what harmful publications can be blocked? Can you please elaborate on that? Because we have quite a lot of questions, for example, on how this draft law tells everyone to react to hate speech. For example, there are such hot issues as issues with Roma people, and there is a lot of hate speech. How it is proposed to react to that? Well, there should be a regulator who reacts to these content violations. This is an important innovation of our project. This is a body of co-regulation, which has to have special procedures and special indications on what is a hate speech, because it is an important issue. It's a difficult question, and they need to provide its conclusions on whether there is a hate speech in a content or not. There is a responsibility provided for that, a special responsibility which might be imposed after it has been detected that there was a hate speech, because we all know that hate speech is a very dangerous thing and we need to react to that. But I would like to continue answering the previous question about the Russian regulator and our draft law. There are a lot of differences between the procedures. Our project suggests that only court can make a decision on whether to block or not an online media. In Russia, the Russian regulator has the right to block this media, and the media that has been blocked can then go to court and appeal this decision. So this is one of the main differences between our laws. There were 4 cases of violations, which there are 4 types of violations, and they can only be the sites can be blocked only using court procedure. I would like to remind you that we now have a special workshop going on right now. You can join it. And my last question within our discussion will be the following. Are there enough explanations around this draft law on media? Probably this is a question to Olga Gerasimyuk. Probably explanations of these provisions can remove those statements that this draft law is draconian, is bad. So what is done in this direction? I would like to ask Olga Gerasimyuk to elaborate on the role of the National Council. Thanks a lot, Oleksandr actually replied to this question. What I would like to say is that the question about comparison to the Russian regulator is a question by a person who has a lot of stereotypes and political cliches which are now out there. Comparison to Roskomnadzor, to the Russian regulator, is not right. In my opinion, it's not a regulator. It's a repressive body in a repressive country. The Russian regulator is not part of the European platform of regulators, where Ukraine is among the most active participants. As for the issue of regulation of the hate speech, well, on the one hand, a lot of people say that the National Council shall deal with the hate speech, but on the other hand side, when we ask to describe it in a piece of a law, so we have a special mechanism, people say you are building a monster who will suppress the freedom of speech. This is the world we live in right now. Are there enough explanations? I would like to say that within the past year, the Council of Europe has held a lot of discussion platforms, online, offline. There was a meeting of chief editors recently. There were also providers of internet services included in the discussion, so we cannot say that there were no enough explanations. There are no limits. The National Council continuously publishes explanations of the provisions of this law on its official website. Well, I don't know what else we need to do. Maybe we should make a feature film on that and show everyone. I don't know why people are talking about that there is no enough information about this draft law. This is only the question of the political struggle, which is our objective reality, and which only increases with time before the elections. But for us, it's not a signal to stop. Thanks a lot, Olga. Well, your idea with a feature film is excellent, but what I want to say is that if you lack information about the new draft law, please look at the website of the Council of Europe and the website of the National Council of Ukraine. I would like to say a couple of words. So the paradox of this situation is that the draft law, which aims to fight disinformation and manipulation in the information sphere, struggles from disinformation and manipulations. Because, yes, it's true, there are a lot of stereotypes and cliches that, for example, it will be possible to block a website overnight. It's not true, because the blocking procedure is quite a lengthy. There shall be at least 3 court instances. So this process will take at least 1 year. In my opinion, we've done a lot about. There has a lot has been done on informing the society about this draft law, but we shall continue this work. We shall continue informing the society. There are some technical problems, but I'm sure we will overcome them before the second reading. Thanks a lot to all the speakers, Christina, Helena, Olga, and Oleksandr. Thanks so much for joining us. I would like to thank participants who listened to us. I wish you a productive continuation of Donbass Media Forum. Thank you.